Hey, wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to Bitcoin Hard Talk episode number 40. It's Friday again, and we are broadcasting live at the same time as Bitcoin 2024, the largest Bitcoin conference in the world. And next week, I'll give you a summary of all the important things that you may have missed. But today, we've just come off the back of doing our back-to-back, where we do one interview. We did an interview, and I suggest you check it out if you didn't watch it. And that was how Bitcoin is changing lives in the global South, Central and Southern America. So I reckon you want to check that one out. This one today, we're going to be doing everything about this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and this week in geopolitics. And as always, it's been a completely packed week. The information flow is not stopping, and the proof of weapons network keeps getting worse, while the proof of work network keeps getting better. A force for peace. If you're new to this episode, my name is Simon Dixon. I spent the last 2 decades of my life obsessing over the topic of Bitcoin investing and money, and I've documented the whole journey so that you can get yourself on the right side of change. Bitcoin Hard Talk is hard talk about hard money. You may not like my opinions, but I will always be committed to sharing the truth with you, regardless of left, regardless of right, regardless of patriotism. I will share what is happening in Bitcoin macro and geopolitics and tell you what you may not like to hear. And today we're going to be discussing, while everyone's talking about the Bitcoin conference in Nashville, there are some major things happening there that will impact the rest of the world. And there were some major movements why China needs Bitcoin and why America is being pushed into a war with Iran and what the impact that will be on Bitcoin. So let's jump straight in with this week in Bitcoin. So there's going to be a central theme, as I do with all these different sections. And in the Bitcoin C, we're going to be exploring the China and US relationship and how it relates to all this news that has come through this week. And first thing is we had an announcement, which is a very interesting development, where artificial intelligence, the AI companies, are in dire need of data centers because the demand for AI data and the electricity and the data and the amount of energy that is powering these artificial intelligence algorithms that we're all using in order to take away more and more jobs, they are really need more and more data centers. And so they've started going around to the Bitcoin miners and looking to acquire the Bitcoin miners. Now, this is a really interesting development. Because what is the MicroStrategy business model? MicroStrategy is a public company run by Michael Saylor. As we speak, Michael Saylor will be appearing on the Bitcoin 2024 stage in a few hours, I believe. And then there's Edward Snowden and JFK to pick a few highlights. But what was the MicroStrategy strategy? Well, it was to have a software business and take that revenue and invest it in Bitcoin and leverage so that you get a leveraged Bitcoin play. Well, imagine these AI data centers where all this demand for artificial intelligence data is being sold as a hardware, software as a service business. And then they get to reinvest some of that or into Bitcoin mining. And so rather than unplugging the ASICs and using the data center for AI, they could use the spare capacity at the AI data center and leave the ASICs, the Bitcoin ASICs plugged in, and hedge the business model with Bitcoins that get rewarded to the miners for verifying all of the transactions. So the company that was looking at the acquisition was Cypher Mining, and is exploring a potential sell after receiving a takeover offer. So this is a really interesting development. Now, how does that relate to the whole relationship between what's happening in America and what's happening in China? Well, if you think about it, if you've watched any of my previous videos, I talked about how Taiwan is the center for all of the chips, and Bitcoin mining requires chips, just as artificial intelligence requires chips, just as pretty much everything requires chips, right down to the drones that are blowing up children in in the Middle East right now, through to fighter jets that are being shipped from both the Russian proof of weapons network and the American proof of weapons network. They require chips too. But on the Bitcoin side, you have the chips that are made in Taiwan. And then what about the ASIC machines that actually provide all this mining? Well, they're made by Bitmain and Canaan. And when I used to go visit China, I haven't visited for quite some time, but when I used to go visit, I spent some time in the Bitmain office and the Canaan office, meeting some of the people that make all of these ASIC machines. And so the ASIC machines are made in China. The chips are made primarily in Taiwan. And it used to be that a big chunk of the mining and cheap electricity used to happen through China as well. But when China engaged in the Bitcoin mining ban, it didn't ban ownership of Bitcoin. It took the exchanges out unless you paid certain bribes to certain corrupt officials. And it also took the Bitcoin mining out, but it kept some of it because they couldn't detect it all, or certain mining was allowed to happen. But a big chunk of it went over to America. Now there's about 40% as estimates, and that is growing and growing. But they're also, if you look at the Bitcoin 2024 conference, on the mining panels, they were talking about diversifying into countries like Paraguay and various other areas in Latin America. So there's some really interesting things happening there. But this kind of epitomizes the chimerica relationship that used to exist before Trump launched the trade war on China and started accusing it of stealing its intellectual property and soured that relationship. And that continued into the Biden administration, as we discussed in many episodes, with the CHIPS Act to try and get America defensively, which is the right thing to do, chip independent from Taiwan. And Taiwan sees that as a threat to their security model, the Silicon Shield that we've covered. But if China started mining Bitcoin again and removed the ban, then they can have a much more important role in the future of Bitcoin in a competition where Trump is saying that he wants all Bitcoin mined in America. Now, we know that decentralization is way more important and you can't achieve that goal. But this narrative between America saying we want it all mined in America and China saying we want to maintain the geopolitically strategic importance of geopolitically neutral currency, Bitcoin, it creates a really healthy competition. And so Bitcoin can be mined anywhere where a government is willing to support it. And it can be done at the cheapest rate possible, which really requires tax incentives to attract the business. And of course, the most important thing is cheaper energy and electricity. And then when you combine that with innovation around renewable energy, then you can actually support the development of your renewable energy industry through Bitcoin and the growth of your innovation around repurposing energy in the grid, which is very, very good for countries. So we're seeing this country desire to use Bitcoin as a mechanism for producing electricity. But then when demand is low, you can put it towards Bitcoin. And when demand is high, you can refactor some of that energy and you get all that innovation. And we're seeing incredible amounts of companies that are building lots of sorts of stuff around that. But these AI data centers that are acquiring Bitcoin miners, if any of those deals go through, they have a choice. They can either switch the miners off and sell those ASICs at the discount in an auction. And we saw that happen when the Bitcoin correction happened in the 2022 Bitcoin credit crisis, when we had all the frauds like FTX and Celsius go down. There was a massive amount of ASICs on the market. They sell them off on the cheap, and then they make their way to a different strategic location and get plugged in wherever electricity is cheapest. And so this is an interesting opportunity. We will watch to see what the acquisition strategy is. Do they look to hedge their AI exposure by combining both Bitcoin and AI? Or do they look to replace the Bitcoin miners and send those ASICs somewhere else? I will, of course, report that as we progress. But it's a very, very important, interesting area to watch. Now, we know that there is already enough chips, enough ASICs, and enough countries that want to get those virgin Bitcoins through mining to support the complete geopolitically neutral security of the industry. So even if you had China's reunification with Taiwan, because America's looking to go more and more chip independent, and that trade war escalates further, as it looks like a Trump administration would do. We don't know what Harris, why am I forgetting the name? Kamala Harris would do. We don't know what that will do. Sorry if I'm doing a Biden, forgetting the name. I'll start introducing Zelensky as Putin soon. But that manufacturer, with the manufacturing in China, with the chips in Taiwan, and then they can plug them in again in China. So I think geopolitically and strategically, China has to reverse the ban due to game theory. So I'm expecting probably in this election cycle or towards the end of the year, a reverse in that policy. So in fact, I think they have to make sure that they get back to the roots of supporting the Bitcoin community. And we're already seeing, I think, some of the first signals of that. My contacts, they're being allowed to do more stuff in China than they were before. And I think we'll start to see that policy move through. Now, why? Because in reaction to the US is going all on and all in Bitcoin through verbal diarrhea. We're about to see whether it's just lip service in order to support election to get the 50 million alleged Americans that own Bitcoin to try and vote for them. But some of the early announcements that we've seen of Bitcoin 2024, we've seen that Jersey City is going to be buying Bitcoin for the city's pension fund. Brilliant way of, even going through some of the reversal in the immigration policies that are being pushed from the Republican Party at the moment. We know that most countries have demographic issues as a result of World War II. When after World War II, people started having babies, those babies are all retiring, and everybody needs to fix their demographic issue. They can fix it through pushing robotics and AI, where AI replaces the need for all of the greater human intelligence, and robotics can replace the need for blue-collar workers. But that also creates a real issue in that, how are you going to pay for these people that lose their jobs? Well, we know that will probably be solved through a central bank digital currency, because the central banks have taken over these countries. And eventually, the end game of a debt-based Ponzi scheme is that you move from capitalism to socialism, where we are today. And then socialism in its extreme, when it kills banking because of the Ponzi scheme, when you can't roll over the Ponzi scheme and get people to buy government bonds, eventually that causes an issue, and you can replace all banks with a central bank digital currency, communism, universal basic income. And if robotics and unemployment gets that bad, then you can use a central bank digital currency in order to push that policy. However, the pension fund, another strategy, is to use migration, but there is an anti-immigration movement because of these, different types of things are being pushed. Usually illegal immigration is used in order to get cheap labor, so that you can businesses to combat their minimum wages that they have to follow with all the law-abiding immigrants or local population. Illegal immigration is used in order to pay below minimum wage, and legal migration is used to solve the demographic issue. But if there's going to be mass deportations and a reversal of that policy, then there's going to be the unemployment trend that they need to look at as well. But you can solve your pension crisis by playing the 4-year cycle with Bitcoin. So if these pensions start to play the 4-year cycle with Bitcoin, then they may be able to reverse some of the losses and issues that they're having because they can't tax the people in order to pay for the existing pensions. So looks like Jersey is starting to play that trend. And later tonight, we saw the RFK Jr. He's going to be giving a presentation, but he was also on the desk at Bitcoin 2024. I quote, RFK Jr. said, "I would like to have a federal government begin to buy Bitcoin, and over my term," so if he gets his term, over the 4 years in the office, ultimately have an equivalent amount of Bitcoin that we have gold, which is a brilliant policy, by the way. It doesn't mean you need to reverse the Ponzi scheme. It means you need to hedge against the occupation by central bank. Now, you don't do that at the central bank level. You do it at Treasury. Because by Treasury building their own strategic reserves, it allows you to defend yourself against the Federal Reserve, which is a private organization that was funded by European bankers in order to remove the gold standard and get the entire America addicted to debt as America is right now. And so that policy is a brilliant policy. So if you slowly over time accumulate as much gold on Treasury, not central bank's balance sheet, then you can have a force and a reserve asset that could either be leveraged by the government in order to build its own Bitcoin-backed, government-backed currency, rather than having to borrow from the central bank. And of course, the central bank is a way of taking people's taxes, causing inflation, and removing the seigniorage income that governments used to benefit from. And because they can borrow and obfuscate all of this through the proof of weapons network, then you get that money going into different directions, sent to foreign forces, which then can reinvest it through things like the Israeli lobby into changing the laws in order to sort the lobby groups. And then companies like the military industrial complex can change it in order to push the war machine. RFK is very well aware of that from his family background as well. Now, interestingly, what would that actually look like? So if you believe, and by the way, we haven't had an audit the Fed. Remember, Ron Paul was the only honest politician. He was talking about ending the Fed. He was talking about ending the funding through intelligence agencies of organizations that they blame, like Al-Qaeda and various other organizations that the US CIA funds in order to exert covert wars. And then they use the media in order to make you think that you need to remove your freedoms. And Snowden will obviously be talking about some of these trends later in the Bitcoin conference. But in order to, because we don't actually know how much gold the Fed has, remember, in the last episodes, they managed to make Bitcoin illegal. FDR managed to make Bitcoin illegal. And then they made all of the Americans swap their gold for $20 initially, and then $35, if I remember correctly. And then they had and confiscated all that gold. But apparently, by public records, they have more than 8,000 metric tons of gold reserves, which is the equivalent at today's price of approximately $500 billion. So $500 billion worth of gold. You've got a $27 trillion economy. You've got about $217 trillion of future obligations that America needs to meet. And you're backing the dollar by only about $500 billion worth of gold. But if you wanted to take how much Bitcoin that would be about 7 million Bitcoin. And at a price, when I did these calculations, Bitcoin was about 70K at the market rate. So that's about 500,000 Bitcoins. Let's take those calculations forward. 500,000 Bitcoin. Sorry, that would push it to, sorry, I did the calculation, sorry, going through. It would push it through about, in order to accumulate that, about 500K in order to accumulate those 1 million Bitcoins. And so that would push a price to approximately 500K if RFK were to push that policy. But then we've got to remember the game theory, because if RFK has got this right, then other countries will need to get this right as well. So not only will China need to reverse the Bitcoin mining policy in order to compete, it will also need to explore the strategic reserve strategy as well. Now, remember, China doesn't disclose all of its gold positions because it's done through many different companies in order to deliberately make it look weaker. But China has been the largest purchaser of gold. And we are looking at, well, the BRICS conference in October is about launching their probably central bank digital currency that aims to be resource backed and used by all of the different members of BRICS, which has had over 40 members, and they'll announce all the latest members in October. And that's why gold is pushing to its all-time highs at the moment, because the central banks need to accumulate it in this multipolar world in order to remain significant. And by selling oil, which is what we're experiencing right now, through these different geopolitical blocks like BRICS, we're seeing these different trends emerge. And so what is Trump doing at the Bitcoin 2024 conference? So Trump is saying, so let's look at the quote. Well, essentially, there were hints, and we're going to find out on Saturday, tomorrow. What is Trump doing right now? Well, he's meeting both sides of the Palestinian and Israeli war side at the moment. He's meeting with Netanyahu, and we're going to be covering more on that in the geopolitical side when we get past the Bitcoin side. And he's also meeting Abbas from the Palestinian Authority, which Netanyahu already said he won't give Palestine a state. They voted 68-9 that it will never happen. And he shared his vision in Congress. We'll cover a bit more about that. But Trump's meeting Abbas. And then tomorrow, he's going to be announcing that they may do a US reserve asset and make Bitcoin a US reserve asset. The rumors is that this is going to be something really small, like $1 million. But we shall see. He's also going to be protecting self-custody, is what he said. We'll hold him to his words and we'll find out. And he wants to make all the Bitcoin and make America, the made in America Bitcoin miners. We'll find out tomorrow what he's actually going to say. But what about the fact that even this week, things are moving fast. Biden stepped down from the presidential election, but he is still the president, asking and really begging the question, who's in charge? We'll cover more about that in the geopolitical side. But it's been proven that, America is, there is a greater force at work in controlling much of the politics that's happening. So Kamala Harris steps in and she says that she's going to be at the Bitcoin conference, or we got confirmation she would. At that time, Bitcoin was 65,000 per Bitcoin. And we know that her type of speech would be something like, imagine what Bitcoin could be, unburdened by what has been. And it would have been a real embarrassment. So she immediately called up Mark Cuban, part of the Silicon Valley syndicate that obviously uses a lot of money laundering by selling that money through endowment funds in colleges in order to invest in many of the stocks that benefit from the political control of the lobby groups. But Kamala rings up Mark Cuban and says, what should I say at the Bitcoin conference? And apparently he was advising her, but immediately Kamala Harris pulled out. And so we're not sure whether she's going to be there or not, but there has been no formal announcement other than saying that she was going to be there. We'll find out. At the same time in Bitcoin, Elon Musk decided to change his profile this week. He put on his blue laser eyes again. And we got different announcements around some of the disclosures from Tesla, from their SEC disclosures. So the rumor is that Elon Musk may be speaking at the Bitcoin conference, but instead, we'll cover it more in the geopolitical side. He got caught on camera looking like a hostage where he had to say why he was going to Congress. And of course, he was clapping like a seal with all the others that need to bow down to the vision of Netanyahu. And Netanyahu told Elon Musk that he needs to come. And he was begrudgingly looking like a hostage, saying, "I'm here on the invitation of Netanyahu." But apparently he may get to speak at Bitcoin 2024, but maybe that's not part of what he's meant to do. But there was a little bit of a ban on David Bailey, the event organizer. If you're familiar with my content, I spent a lot of time with David Bailey back in the day when he lived in China, before he got into going back into Bitcoin 2019 and beyond. And he was fighting the resistance against the digital currency group and Grayscale because of all the atrocities and craziness that was happening over there. And he was a big holder of GBTC shares before it went over to the Bitcoin ETF. And I supported him in rallying together all the different shareholders. But David Bailey got his account suspended because he posted a picture of Elon Musk landing in Nashville. And obviously he was asked to remove that. He's not meant to do that for security reasons. And that led to the suspension of his account. And then immediately that was rumors that Elon was speaking at Bitcoin 2024. We haven't had those rumors confirmed. But the next footage we got is that he was spotted in DC at the request of Benjamin Netanyahu. But we got the disclosure requirements and the disclosures. Turns out that Tesla, everyone was saying that Tesla sold all its Bitcoin. I was telling people throughout, that's not the case. It didn't sell its Bitcoin, but it still got its hodl position of $780 million worth of Bitcoin was the disclosure. SpaceX also owns about $500 million worth of Bitcoin from the disclosure. And Musk also owns an undisclosed amount personally. So, he's hedging himself with Bitcoin, as everyone should do. The greatest entrepreneurs and richest people are doing that. We got a whole lot of murmurings from what was going to be happening with Dell. We haven't seen any of that yet. But of course, those were the different disclosures we got. So that was confirmed. We also remember in previous episodes, I was talking about how the best way to execute this strategy is actually to just transfer the confiscated Bitcoin from the Department of Justice and move them over to Treasury, not the central bank. The central bank means you give those Bitcoin over to the American occupation. But instead, you should give those over to Treasury so it can build a better dollar without the central bank digital currency dollar that will be coming through. And you can also allow it to innovate on the private side, where you'll have stable coins that disrupt the banking cartel, because instead you can go direct from government lending to stable coin without the central bank skimming off and requiring all the taxpayers to pay for the inflation, creating all the wealth inequality, and then being able to have all the political influence through the war machine and the proof of weapons network. But on CNBC, there was discussions around using this. And so the strategy that I shared on Bitcoin Hard Talk in previous episodes, and I started talking more vocally about central bank digital currency. Firstly, wrote a book about it in 2011, before central bank digital currencies was a term, but started talking about it when China launched it in 2016. And then shared that US would be using this. Now, what I didn't think, if you look back at the videos, I always thought Japan would be the first to launch their central bank digital currency, and then America would be lost. But it looks like this is happening in reverse. America is looking to do strategic asset reserves at Treasury and ban central bank digital currencies. But we know that the power structure, when the banks get into moments of fear, the central bank finds a way of reversing those trends and decides which bank to send bust, and decides which one, using some of this artificial technology paid for by BlackRock, and decides which banks will be the winners and losers depending on the power structure. And so there was on CNBC a suggestion of the strategy that I suggested in previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, which is great to see, for the DOJ to transfer those over to Treasury. We'll see whether that happens. What else did we get this week? Well, we got this week, and I think this will be a long-term strategy, by the way. It won't happen immediately, but this is a really promising start. And it's great to see that we're going to have these resistance movements against the central banks as well. This week, we had the SEC officially approve the trading of the spot Ethereum ETFs. So we've already had a couple of days of it, and the latest data suggests that there was $1 billion of trading volume in day one. That was incredibly successful. That surpassed my expectations. And in day two, there was just over 900 million. So about $2 billion of trading volume. But we got a correction in the price. Now, this is exactly what happened to Bitcoin during the Bitcoin ETF launch. We had the oppression in the price. And anyone that was watching Bitcoin Hard Talk was ready for that. Because we shared that Grayscale needs to convert from its crazy 2.5% fee, creating a lot of Ethereum selling pressure as the units in the Grayscale Ethereum ETF convert, the Grayscale Trust convert over to a more competitive, and then you have the inflows, and then you have the readjustment mechanism that also creates a tax liability if you don't do it correctly, which leads to selling pressure in Ethereum. And so the 10% correction that we shared in previous episodes is what happened. There was a greater correction in Ethereum, and we haven't seen the Ethereum to Bitcoin price bounce backwards, but there was a lower price in the correction of Bitcoin. And we just got to wait for the Grayscale 2.5% fee to play its way out. And then I think this is a temporary correction that created another great opportunity on top of the German government giving you that selling opportunity to get your cheap Bitcoins this month or last month. And now the Ethereum ETF spot launch and Grayscale gave you another opportunity to get that. You know, the way that I do it, I accumulate Bitcoin as savings, and then I have an investment bucket. We're going to be discussing more of this in the free video series that I'm going to be launching. We're set to launch in September, October. If you're not a member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, it's completely free. Head over to simondixon.com. I give you all the updates every week. We give you the backup of all the videos. And you can catch up on previous things. Like last year, after the 4-year cycle in 2020, I gave the Great Depression of the 2020s video series on how to protect yourself. This year, 4 years later, I'm going to be sharing how that portfolio performed in the next, what I'm calling now proxy Great Depression of the 2020 video series. Make sure you're on and you've got your free membership on simondixon.com so that we can keep you up to date with all of that, and make sure you get all of the latest news. But anyway, this created a bit of a drag on the market. There was a big correction in NASDAQ at the same time. So that led to Ethereum down 10%, Bitcoin down 5%, and a drag on the market right during when we're going to get the information, and different announcement flows from Bitcoin 2024. But this time will pass. And remember the rules that I always teach people: own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. And hopefully you're sticking to that rule, and it creates another great opportunity to value your wealth in Bitcoin and get more Bitcoin as a result of your fiat currency earnings. What else is going to give us a nice opportunity? Well, the Mt. Gox, they transferred more of their Bitcoin to Bitstamp, a company that was funded on Bank to the Future as well, that I'm a shareholder in for full disclosure. But we actually exited that, covered that in previous broadcasts. And also a bunch of Bitcoin got distributed through Kraken, full disclosure. I'm a shareholder in Kraken as well. And what else did we see? Well, there was a little bit of a reminder that you should never be storing your Bitcoin at exchanges, that if you want to buy Bitcoin at these exchanges, you should only store them either self-custody or with a regulated virtual asset service provider that segregates them as a custody relationship, like we do at Bank to the Future through our segregated virtual asset service provider. has to go through the audit requirements, can't be used for leverage. That's why you separate them from exchanges. But India's largest cryptocurrency exchange, I'm not talking about Uno Coin. Uno Coin was one of the largest that was funded through Bank to the Future as well, that I'm a shareholder in. This one was called WazirX. Never heard of it before, but apparently a large exchange in India. They suffered a major security breach, and that led to the theft of $230 million in digital assets. So always remember that you don't store your Bitcoin in exchanges, even if you're buying them through exchanges. What else did we see? Well, we saw an interesting announcement as well. At Bank to the Future, we allow people to invest in not just private equity like Kraken, Unocoin, Bitstamp, and others. We also allow people to invest in public shares and Bitcoin shares. And there's more and more coming through. We had an announcement. One of the companies that we were going to participate in their round and offer it to Bank to the Future investors in the past, but that one never happened. But Fold announced that they're doing a SPAC, and they have reversed, and they are now public on Nasdaq. So we're getting more and more companies like Fold going public. This was via a $365 million SPAC deal. So this gives us more and more ways of getting exposure to the industry and diversifying. I'm going to be sharing exactly how I manage all of that in the video series that I'm going to be releasing that we're working on right now. And everybody on simondixon.com, you'll get access to that video series, and we'll email you full details. Okay, so that was this week in Bitcoin. Now let's head over to the macro side. So we started to get announcements that China is going to be following the US strategy. China is stimulating cutting rates in order to roll over a debt-based Ponzi scheme. They made the good move of allowing banks to go bust rather than bailing them out, which is obviously the US model of remove free markets, allow banks to be rolled over, and then keep interest rates low in order to push the Ponzi scheme. Well, China's doing the same. They started announcing that they're going to be lowering gas prices, and they're going to be cutting rates as well. And so US will follow eventually in order to appease the shareholders, so that you can push up the price of real estate and stocks and make wealth inequality worse and worse. That creates the polarization that can lead to these civil wars and this extreme popularism that we're seeing in the extreme left and extreme right at the moment. But China's following the US strategy as well. And every time we're looking, I was on several spaces this week where all of the US people are saying China's a complete manipulator. When at the same time cheering on the Fed, please, 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 when are you going to lower rates so that you can push my stock market and real estate and create more wealth inequality and create the next generation that can't buy stocks and can't buy real estate, and fortunately found Bitcoin in order to make themselves reverse the trend of being on the wrong side of all the debt inequality that the Fed creates. But all of these free marketer people are saying, please, 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 Fed, pump my bag. We need you to lower rates. At the same time, they're saying that China's a complete manipulator for doing the same thing. Just get it. These are fiat-based Ponzi schemes where every day America's looking more like China and China's looking more like America. And eventually the Ponzi scheme will blow up and they'll meet in the middle with a central bank digital currency based upon fear in order to fund additional proxy wars and take us into this crazy world that we are seeing right now. But do remember, we'll cover this more in the geopolitical section. China has a peace plan and America has a war plan, because America is the profiteer from all of the forever wars and NATO expansion. Sorry, I got a little bit above, a little bit further. But now the Federal Reserve, what has it created? It's created $1 trillion of unrealized losses by soaking up all of those assets from banks and financial institutions by pushing interest rates so that you can create these cycles where during good times, everybody has these low interest rates and gets deeper into debt. But when inflation comes along, they increase interest rates and send all the people that save the economy bankrupt by trying to keep those interest rates and make their cost of debt a lot higher. Then they suck up all those assets onto their balance sheet, and they end up with $1 trillion of unrealized losses like they have right now. America announced growing GDP. So this means that potentially this will give them the incentive to cut rates so that they can roll over the Ponzi scheme. GDP was 2.8% on the prints this week. And that is better than expected. They were expecting 2.1%. And obviously that is created through GDP, doesn't factor in the wealth inequality, and it doesn't factor in the fact that all of the inflation has already made things unaffordable. And even if you get it down to 3%, it's 3% on top of everything that's already seen that's already unaffordable. What else did we see? So on Wednesday, they announced that in the Wednesday crash. So you remember I talked about that correction in the stock market. In one day, we saw $1.1 trillion wiped out from the US stock market. Remember the situation that the US is in right now. They're still the largest economy, depending on the numbers you believe in. Of course, Americans will say, we're transparent. We got a $27 trillion economy. We don't know what China's doing. China's the manipulator. But you got $27 trillion of GDP. But in the US, you got $35 trillion of debt. But the bit they don't tell you and they don't disclose is that they got $217 trillion of future liabilities that they have to meet. Don't believe anything that the politicians say, whether it's Trump or Harris, that they can grow their way out of that. No, this is the way the system was designed. It ends in war. It ends in civil disruption. And and after the war, you have a new world order and a monetary renegotiation. And the existing powers that control those central banks, they decide to back the new world order because, of course, they're hedging both America and China and the different powers. And they make you think because they get you to fund their wars and create inflation on their own people. What are those liabilities, those 217 trillion liabilities that apparently Trump's going to drill and create all the growth to solve the biggest Ponzi scheme that can never be solved? Well, the first bit of liability is Medicare and Social Security. How are those solved? Well, you can only solve those by fixing your demographic issue that we covered earlier. And there is an anti-immigration policy because of the belief that that solves the problem. So when the central bank creates a Ponzi scheme, you tend to blame it on the people that have been imported as immigrants. And then you have a rhetoric of these are the people creating the crimes. I'm not saying whether that's true or not. Of course, people need to secure their borders. And of course, people need to control their immigration in line with the strategic goals. But they don't tell you about this because they want to solve it through more money printing. And then they can have more control over government. The more they lend to government, the bigger and bigger and more socialist the economy gets. It can't be dampened by the gold reserve, which the Federal Reserve moves. And then you can move over to their central bank digital currency, which is full control and full communism, which all of the engineers and designers of the Federal Reserve System, when the European banks funded it, were communist sympathizers. And they managed to fool America into thinking that this is good for America. And then that was exported through the IMF and then exported globally and creating all the debt slavery that we see right now. So where are we right now? Well, what is the second thing that is causing all of this $217 trillion of liabilities and future liabilities? of course, is the interest on the debt. And the interest on the debt is backed by tax, and the tax only covers the interest on the debt, or approximately 72% of the interest on the debt, and it will move to 100% and beyond. And what is the next committed liability? Well, of course, it's all the obligations to send America defense aid over to different countries, push the NATO war machine, push the Israel war machine, and push the Taiwan war machine. And that money comes back into America, pushing up the stocks that benefits the shareholders that laundered all the money through the colleges and the big endowment funds and the different ways of controlling American lawmakers in order to push the Department of War, it used to be called. Now it's called the Department of Defense. So remember, this election, if you understand policy, is going to be determined by three main things: inflation, which is created by central banks; war, that is funded by central banks; and migration, that is created by destroying countries through war, where they want to leave their country because the central bank and the IMF destroy the central bank in that country, creating this global north and global south divide. And then you create this extreme left and right through wealth inequality that drives all the people on the left to think that the system shafted them, where they want to kill everyone on the right, and all the people on the right want to escape the system because they think they're fighting communism, and then they engineer the system through funneling their money through lobby groups in order to change the law and maintain power. And so that is the migration thing. And then you end up blaming all those migrants because where is all the crime created? All the crime is created from the debt slavery that drives people into the worst that they can be, because they end up thinking that they have no other choice, because they didn't get the Bitcoin education and they didn't get hard money and they didn't realize that there was an exit from this system. And that turns me to my passion around interviewing people like Adam. If you didn't check out the interview today, where he's creating open source Bitcoin education to help people get their first Bitcoin and get their Primera Bitcoin, and translating it into all the different languages. And my passion to release every 4 years the video series that I'll be releasing this 4 years to help people break the cycle and protect themselves during these proxy Great Depression of the 2020s. So I'll be sharing what that means as well. But we always know, if you've been watching my episode for a while, that this always leads to civil war, coup d'etats, revolutions, and then external countries come in and say, I can change the world order. The central banks fund both sides. And then we get the monetary renegotiation and reset, which is actually the best, most prosperous time in history, because they move back to a sound money standard and we start focusing on how to build real things rather than funding wars. But of course, we know that if they do that on debt-based Ponzi schemes, you repeat the cycle and you get the next world order that is formed, and the central bank that removes capitalism and hard money over to fiat currency and socialism, over to communism, martial law, and global wars and central bank digital currencies to take away people's freedoms at the peak of the debt cycle. So who's on the wrong side of the peak of the debt cycle? Well, it looks like Biden. He had to pull out. And what I think was really interesting about the way Biden did it is that it was done on X. This shows how we have this new media. Didn't even bother to go on TV to do it, because we're fighting back against the traditional media, because the traditional media lies to us. And on X, we get to all speak to each other and meet people all around the world and realize that our governments are just pitting us against each other, making us think that this is a war between the left and the right, that this is a war between Muslims and Jews is the latest one. And later it will be a different type of demographic, and the immigrants versus the natives, versus the people that came through, and all these different narratives that we just need to understand that is a divide and conquer strategy, and we need to tone it down. And that's why we're resisting against traditional media, because traditional media is controlled to think a different way. That was never more apparent, and I'll cover more of this in the geopolitical section. Completely different from reality. But Biden used X. He put his resignation letter on X, and it wasn't until a few days later that he did his address and made the decision to step aside. And now Kamala Harris is launching new energy into the left, and of course meeting her boss and the boss of all politicians in Congress, meeting Netanyahu yesterday, who told her how it's going to be. And then her job is to make the people that are protesting against these atrocities, appease them, but also fund and continue to fund the atrocities that come back to the war machine in America. So now, where is it right now? How far has the war machine got America? The interest payments on the US national debt is now 1.14 trillion. This is going exponential. As I said, it's gone from 72% to now 76% of all income taxes collected are now going to servicing the central bank and the banks that get to benefit from money creation as a result. What else do we start to see? Well, we start to see, of course, the lobby groups pushing more freedom taking away. So Snowden, he's going to be speaking at the Bitcoin conference, a huge proponent of Bitcoin, because he was the one that exposed that we're all being spied on, and that all of these companies that are controlled by these forces and get on the right side of the central bank get to borrow at 0% interest, and then they give all the data over to government, and those governments are controlled by central banks and used by intelligence agencies. And then those intelligence agencies use all that data in order to build things like the artificial intelligence, which is deciding which children to kill in some of these atrocities that are created by the central banks. Well, they tried to make a right move, and the right move is that they wanted to ban Congress members from trading stocks before November elections. Why did they do that? Because they don't want the bribery to be so obvious, that people know when the war is going to happen and they know when the policies are going to happen. And so Nancy Pelosi loads up on the war machine stocks in order to push the laws in the direction of the lobby groups. So they're trying to fight back against that and try and make it look like it's not so blatant. I'm sorry, Nancy Pelosi, that takes away your recent business model. I think that means that before that actually gets an opportunity to go through, Nancy and all the others that are going to be pushing the lobby group's interests, they need to load up on US war machines stocks. Remember what I said this week, and it went down exactly how I said it was going to go. This week, I told you, and I've been covering for a long time, that Netanyahu is going to come to Congress, and both the left and the right are going to be clapping like seals as he tells the world, Americans, you need to die and fight my war against Iran to ensure that I'm the only military and completely illegal nuclear power in the Middle East, and you must pay for it with more inflation. And of course, it's American troops that must fight this for us, because you need to understand that this is a fight for freedom and a fight for democracy. And you must stand on the right side of history against the evil that I told you through the media is how the world is. And Nancy Pelosi, don't forget your Bitcoin ETF too as well. So of course they hopefully will be protecting themselves And the ETF is the way that they're going to be doing that as well. So now let's move over to the final section, the geopolitical section. Now, when I originally started covering how Bitcoin is a geopolitical play and a resistance movement, many people criticized me, asking me to stay in my lane. And this was the same thing that happened when I was just speaking about banking reform. And people were saying, hey, why are you talking about this Bitcoin crap in 2011? They said, stay in your lane and just talk about banking reform. But I knew Bitcoin was going to be the resistance movement and the thing that made all the difference. And I always knew that Bitcoin was a geopolitical and macro story and a resistance movement against central banking. And I got millions of people that over the years have listened to my content and got into Bitcoin and protected themselves as well. And when I started covering more on the macro side, people were like, hey, stay in your lane and just talk about Bitcoin. Then they realized, oh, this is going to become a macro play. The macro politics and Bitcoin, as it becomes more significant, maybe Simon should have talked about that. And people start understanding how these things all fit together. And then when I started talking about war, everyone said, hey, Simon, stay in your lane. That's not for you. Stop talking about war. You're starting to talk about my country right now, and I don't like that because I've been fed a narrative. You're starting to sound like a conspiracy theorist. I hope everyone's starting to see that everything's playing out in real time, exactly as we've been covering on Bitcoin Hard Talk. And I hope you have been questioning your governments a lot more and questioning why things are the way they are a lot more, and why your media is telling you that you need to believe in something that is so radically different to what you later find out to be the truth. And I hope you can see that even though you may not like it that I talk about these things, Bitcoin fits into the whole story. It all fits together, is one jigsaw puzzle. And thanks to everybody that has been crowdsourcing this information together. And now that I get to learn from people that have spent their whole careers in this stuff, I get to pull it together and you get to question more as well. So in episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, when people got very upset that I explained that the US is occupied by the Federal Reserve, and that the markets and everybody that's on the right side of history, because they own the assets and they got to borrow at 0% interest, they'll be begging the Fed to support them and cutting rates. And that is very much like China, that what you're criticizing them of. And maybe patriotism is a good thing, because patriotism to me means standing up against your government, standing up against your central banks and exposing the truth. And that's what I like more and more people to do. If you watched Netanyahu as he strolled into Congress, and I told everybody, get ready, he's going to tell you why you need to go to war with Iran, and everyone from the left and everyone from the right is going to be given a bigger standing ovation, clapping like seals, while complete atrocities are happening and children are getting blown up and massacres are happening all around the world. And if you saw me on X, where I put that side-by-side videos of what everyone was clapping like a seal for, which looked like a cult, which can only be described as a cult, even if Abraham Lincoln and JFK were able to come back from death and assassination and turn up in Congress, they would not have got a bigger round of applause than the ruler of both the left and the right, Netanyahu, got when they told everybody and told America that you must go to war with Iran, you must pay for it, and more Americans must get poor because we're going to push up the stocks that we own, and I will tell you when to clap, and I will tell you not to clap. If you did not see that playing out in real time, with all these graffitis and, any different types of agendas that are being funded. But remember, there's a real core bunch of people that have figured this stuff out that are protesting. There's a real core bunch of people like myself that come from, Jewish families that want to stand against Israel because they see what is happening to America as a result of it and what is happening to UK as a result of it. And they're seeing and exposing it in real time. And they're seeing the military-industrial complex, and they're seeing these different things. And they're seeing the deep state. They're seeing it all happening in real time. And yet, the primary focus that you need to focus on is what I think is a disgusting act. I don't think anyone should be burning their own flags. But come on, that is a complete distraction relative to the complete occupation of what is meant to be the democracy that's exported through war around the world. I want to see that freedom again. I want to see the US Constitution. I want UK to copy the good US Constitution. I want them to welcome people like Snowden and Assange, that welcome more freedom of speech and create laws that help you fight against governments and remove the central bankers like those assassinated presidents did. And rather than giving higher in taxes to pay the interest on the central bank, I want to see governments to be able to take back control of what they're constitutionally meant to do, provide sound money for people so that people can actually save and people can actually bring out their best work in the world rather than figuring out how to just pay interest on their debt slavery. It is now never more viewable than that speech, and I encourage you all to watch it, when Netanyahu walked into Congress and showed America who is the boss. And of course, today, Trump has to meet Netanyahu. That's going to be for the first time since 2020. Why did that happen? Not until 2020, because Trump actually, had a real altercation with Netanyahu, when Netanyahu congratulated Biden on what he considered a rigged election, and created all of the different politics that came from that. But now he has to meet him because he didn't get assassinated. And it turns out he might be the next president. And whatever plan was meant to be put in force, it didn't really work out that way. But prior to this, Trump and Netanyahu, they had a different altercation because he considered Netanyahu, as Netanyahu did with all the previous presidents when he came into Congress and told them what they need to do to America, and all those different things that we've seen. But to even it out, as I said, Trump is meeting the leader of the Palestinian Authority, Abbas, too. So it looks like there's this fake pretense that America's trying to support a two-state solution when Israel has already said there will never be one, and Israel and Netanyahu told. And by the way, when I talk about the Israeli government, don't get confused with me talking about Israeli people and American people. All people should be resisting against these things and trying to get on the right side of history and making sure that people understand that things are very different. So we're told that we need to focus on the fake communist forces. And that's what we need to worry about. And it's all because of immigration. And that's what we need to worry about. And that's leading to people burning flags, which is an act I don't think should happen. But you are being zoomed in through the media into the one thing that you need to focus your attention on in order to not see the divide and conquer that's happening in real time right in front of you, and the real forces that make all the real difference as well. So remember, Trump had to accept $200 million from the Israeli lobby and people that are able to make those contributions. So we know that that's gone through. We know that, what else do we know? That through the files, remember, and people talk about this conspiracy, do you actually read the files? The FBI released the Epstein files. We know that Trump was put on there. And we know that that's either two things. It's a blackmail network for intelligence agencies to use to control politicians. And so is Trump controlled? Because he's got his 200 million of funding, and he's also put on the Epstein list. And we know that CIA and Mossad use those in order to control governments that sit the layer down. You have the central banks on the top, intelligence agencies, and then you have the governments. And then we create this left and right divide so that you can justify civil wars, revolutions, coups d'etats. You know, if you read the documents, you know that that these forces are used, and that was a network that the Israeli government would meet with Epstein, and these were used in order to get photos to bribe politicians, and the sick people that would actually engage in these sick acts would have it all on videos. And obviously, you know, if you haven't figured out all this stuff, the first time I discovered it, I was really pushed back as well. But thanks to WikiLeaks and thanks to the courts releasing these files, we get to actually see the real ones. And so what actually happened during this disgusting act of occupation? Well, we get to see that Netanyahu in real time requested the US to go to war with Iran. It also said that it has to continue the illegal occupation of the West Bank, which it voted to annex, and Gaza, which it now has the justification that it always wanted to move it from an occupation to a blockade back to an occupation that it has right now. And it also wants to create what's called an Abraham Alliance. So before it was Abraham Accords. Abraham Accords was a way of sidestepping Iran and building a new version of the Middle East that was just all the monarchs that the British implanted into the kingdoms when it designed the Middle East in order to create maximum divide to control all the oil. But it now wants to move from Abraham Accords, which was a Trump initiative, to the Abraham Alliance. Now, what's an Abraham Alliance? Let's ramp up the language here. We want to go from the NATO alliance to the Abraham Alliance. This is NATO expansion into the Middle East, led by the only illegal nuke that exists in the Middle East, which is owned by Israel. And so you are told now that you need to fund it, Americans. You're paying for it. And you're going to get more inflation. And the Fed is going to print the money for it. And you need to pay for it because that money is going to go back into Israel so they can create more AI weapons where all the data goes, because they can persuade you that you need to give up more freedom. So the new Abraham Alliance is a way of saying, please, America, bomb Iran, pay for it, create more inflation, fund it with the Federal Reserve, and expand the NATO alliance into Israel being the leader of the Middle East. And so we can be the only nuclear power, and you get rid of any chance of Iran or Saudi Arabia being able to create the only thing that leads to peace. If you look at Russia and North Korea, they were only able to be left alone from the military industrial complex by creating their own nukes. And again, don't translate this as me being fans of those governments. All governments are committing atrocities. They have their own military industrial complex. They all create human rights violations on their own people. But that is their own people's struggle against their government, as we need more freedom of speech. Resist, changing regimes only turns countries into puppet states and kills more and more people, as we saw in Iraq. Netanyahu's war in Iraq. America, you pay for it. We replace Saddam Hussein with Al-Qaeda, which then goes into ISIS. And then the intelligence agency control them. You have a failed state. And then America can control 1/3 of it. And then it can use the oil in these countries like Syria and Iraq in order to make you think that that's a force you need to fight against. They blow up more and more atrocities. They sell more weapons. And then you've got that non-congressional money that you can spend outside the system to engage in all sorts of illegal acts and bribe networks. And then to say, we're exporting democracy, we're protecting our freedom. So what is happening in the real International Court of Justice as a result of all of this complete illegal activities? Well, the International Court of Justice this week, it rejected all objections raised by Israel, by the United States, and all of the other Western nations, and it ruled that Israel's occupation in Gaza and the West Bank, and including East Jerusalem, which Trump moved the American embassy to and gave to Israel, and Netanyahu said, you need to make it our capital. And all the settlements, which is the 700,000 people where they just go tear people out of Palestine, out of their homes in the West Bank, blow up their houses. There was more of them blowing up. And then they rebuild them and put Israelis in land that's not theirs. And now they no longer have land. And then because they control air, they switch off and make human rights violations that makes them want to, if they survive, leave the country. And when they leave the country, they kill UNRWA, the United Nations division that controls the right to return, so that the 6 million people that have been expelled can never return. It is now ruled that the Western allies can no longer pretend it's not illegal. And by court order, it is completely illegal. The ICJ declared that they are committing racial segregation, an apartheid state, and that they need to immediately exit the Palestinian territories. And what did we get today? The force that defended it all this time, that sends over all the weapons that we're paying for in countries like UK, the United Kingdom finally said there is only one country in the world left that doesn't respect international law anymore. In the entire world, the United States is the only country left. Because at the very same time as you, America, hosting Netanyahu, who's a war criminal, that the ICJ says you must arrest by law, just like if Putin stepped into the US, the ICJ ruled that he's a war criminal, that you must arrest by law. You must do the exact same with Netanyahu. And the UK came out and unbelievably said that if the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu steps inside the UK right now, we will respect the international laws and we will arrest him immediately and put out the warrant for his arrest. And we will fight against his war crimes committed in Gaza. It also said that next, the UK government needs to ban all weapon sales and arms sales to Israel, and it needs to follow international law. So how did we get here? And by the way, I don't believe them, because at the moment, as we speak, UK is also killing civilians in Yemen and is also sending weapons. But we shall see. This is a glimmer of hope. There is only one country in the world, and that same person sat in Congress and got more of a standing ovation than if Abraham Lincoln and JFK himself returned from the dead, and any sitting prime minister, any sitting president or politician in the US would get. Do you think that they've all been bought? Do you think there's something up here? So how did we get here? Well, I don't want to go too deep into it, but let me help you understand the plan when you follow the money. And I want all pushback in the comments. You can let me know. And hopefully this video will back it up in the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. And remember, why do I say this? I only care about the truth. I only care about following the money and me putting together a hypothesis of where this goes next so that you can protect yourself and get ahead of the trend. Okay. What was Israel's plan? After the Brits gave away and split up the Middle East, well, they said, you can put together diplomacy. If you can maintain all of the puppet governments that we implant, then you can have kingdoms and monarchies. just like the British kingdom and monarchy that the Americans fought against in the Civil War and the War of and the Independence. So who have they exercised that agenda on? Well, the IMF, a division of the Federal Reserve, you could call it, which was funded by European bankers, a division of the central bank of the Bank of England, which was a partnership to fund wars with the monarchy in Britain and the central bankers. Well, you can negotiate with the puppet government. So they've got peace agreements, or they've got agreements to support the illegal activities from Egypt, from Jordan, from UAE, from Bahrain, from Sudan, and from Monaco. And we won't put regime change in those countries as long as you take our IMF money. And then anytime you get out of control, we'll drain all your dollar reserves by making you print your local currency that causes hyperinflation. Remember the economic hitmen from Confessions of an Economic Hitman. But the countries that don't bow down to that vision, you need to be killed. You need a coup d'etat. You need regime change. You need to be bombed by the military-industrial complex, and American people need to pay for it. So who are the countries that didn't do that? Libya, disaster. Syria, disaster. Iraq, disaster. Lebanon, disaster. Yemen, disaster. All been destroyed, and we all paid for it through inflation, through central banking. And then the other ones that we need to be told that they're the complete enemies, and we get all these proxy wars, or we get these direct wars from US and UK's invasions and coup d'etats. But the last country standing, and I am no fan of the regime, is the only country in the region that Netanyahu tells the American people that you need to take to war right now. Why? Because they've got human rights violations, and therefore you need to change their government. I'm not asking you to like their government. I hate their government. But can't you see what's happening here? The only that had military independence was Iran. We know that many false flag operations were created. We know because Israel's confessed to them. You can look at them, what happened in Egypt. These things are released through WikiLeaks, the actual official documents. These are not just theories. And now what is happening? Weaponized October the 7th, which, by the way, we've seen all the reports of how different what actually happened is from what was reported. And if you haven't seen those reports, it's because your traditional media won't allow you. Just look on my X feed. You can see some of the reputable journalists that are doing real journalism. Of course, there were atrocities. Of course there were. But it wasn't nothing like the emotion that you need to be told, and the one that you were told in order to make you believe that you need to go to war with Iran. We know that this is what you see time and time again. We've seen it in Iraq. We've seen it in Syria. What do they say to justify it? Weapons of mass destruction. Oh, there's chemical warfare in Syria. You need to go to war, and we need to print the money. You need more inflation. Iraq, even though they were already, Scott Ritter, who's doing a space right now, he already said, I was the one in charge of demilitarizing Iraq. The Americans knew. He was speaking as loud as possible, but they lied to you and said that you need to go to war. And that costs you $2 trillion and 1 million Iraqis killed. It's just like what they're telling you right now. Netanyahu is telling you there are weapons of mass destructions in Iran. You must go to war. We were told that in Iraq and in Libya and in Syria, these are unconstitutional places, undemocratic places. We need to implement regime change. We need to export our values. We need to liberate the people. And I'm not saying that these governments don't commit atrocities, but what they get afterwards is a lot damn worse. And even the right, Republicans, they're saying, look at how the left came out of Afghanistan. That was a joke. Even when they move and go out of the forever wars, they criticize them as well. Just like they are saying in Iran right now. Wake up, people. Just like they're saying, oh, we need to export and put our democracy. We need to bring back the kingdoms and the puppet states and the monarchs. Did you ever watch Ron Paul? Ron Paul was the only honest politician. He said, end the Fed, because he knew this. He also said, America, stop funding these groups like Al-Qaeda. And that he knew that intelligence agencies were combined with those, they drove the plane, but who was organizing it? It was the intelligence agencies. Ron Paul was the only honest politician. He even came out and said Netanyahu was the one that was utilizing October the 7th and funding and allowing funding, trying to get the Palestinian authorities in there, because what did WikiLeaks show? The documents that this was all meant to happen so they could justify the war with Iran and get Americans to want to do it and get the Brits to want to do it and create divide and conquer through immigration. Make sure you look at those documents, the FBI official reports from 9/11 and the different names that were extracted, the ones that were arrested because they saw what was happening. See what's in front of you. And demand your government to unredact it. RFK said that he'd do it. Trump said that he'd do it. But instead, we get the complete opposite rhetoric. What did Netanyahu also say during this epic speech? He said that Iran assassinated Trump. Of course, Iran assassinated Trump. And then what did Trump say after that? He came out on his network and says, if I die, with a link to Netanyahu's speech, then make sure Iran is eliminated off the map. Galvanizing, playing into this rhetoric. And who's the vice president? J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance said, we need to slap Iran harder. We need to do it harder. So if Trump gets assassinated, he says you got to kill Iran and bomb Iran. And J.D. Vance says, you got to bomb Iran. And Netanyahu says, you got to bomb Iran. And Kamala Harris says, you got to push forward with NATO. And NATO now becomes the the Abraham Alliance. We know what's going to happen next. Israel's going to go to war with Lebanon and expand it there. The UK and the US, our money's going to continue to bomb civilians in Yemen. And something is going to happen over the years ahead to trigger something in order for the UK and the US to bomb Iran. Because that is what the central bank says has to happen. And the way we're going to justify it is by playing off the left and the right and the different religious groups against each other, so that we start focusing on whether someone burnt an American flag versus seeing what is right in front of us in Congress. Occupation funded by the occupation of the central banks. 1 million dead in Iraq. We'll see the same again. You'll pay for it forever. You'll get more inflation. The US war machine will profit. And just like that Israeli that got 4.5 billion from their insurance by being able to buy the Twin Towers before it went down, the different forces will be able to profit from it. We need to stand against our governments and return to more constitutional. Don't allow them to do regime change. Don't pay through it for inflation, and do a peaceful resistance against central banking. Thomas Massey, the only honest politician, that didn't attend the speech. He told us that every Congress member, they have to call APEC and their APEC babysitter before they make any policies. And you got to call their APEC guy, which is part of the Israeli lobby. It's not the whole thing. And if not, you get blackmailed. And he also said that you got to end the Fed. Why? Because he read the Bitcoin standard. He understands Austrian economics. He can tell us what's happening through here because he's not bought and he didn't take the money. And of course, they slander him like crazy. He came out and said, you call me whatever you want. What's the weapon they use? Anti-Semitism is the weapon that they use. This is nothing about it. This is against the governments that are taking us in this direction. And he puts out the End the Fed bill. No one pays attention. Everyone's talking about the things that don't matter. The immigrants. The burning of the flag. Of course, these are hot topics, but they want you to focus on that. Okay, so I hope you can see where this is going. Let's look at some of the other things, and then we're going to close off for this week. Because you'll see all the Bitcoin 2024. We'll see what RFK has to say, and you can catch up on the other things. Right, so let's go through some of the other news. Hey, guess what? By the way, it was really interesting. I looked at some stats, and I was like, are even America and Europe, are they following the Russian sanctions? Because they tell everyone else that they need to follow the Russian sanctions. It turns out that there's one exemption in the US and EU from the Russian sanctions, and that is the military-industrial complex. So 60% of Russia's imported military components come from the US and the Western allies. Today, killing Ukrainians. Why do they get an exemption? 18% of Russians' foreign trade, that's about 130 billion, still comes from the exempt activities that don't need to adhere to the sanctions. Oh, and guess what? India, the country that we're told is an ally, because there's another NATO expansion, and that NATO expansion is into Asia, because we need to control the chips. And China's the boogie monster in Asia, obviously. But India has increased its Russian oil imports by 1,800% since the war in Ukraine. So India increases 1,800% since the war in Ukraine. Now, we're told that China is enabling the war. Why? Because at the NATO conference, they said that we need to worry about China. We certainly don't need to worry about India. But China only increased its oil imports from Russia by 43%. 43%, 1,800%. Why don't they hold India? Why are they not held in account? Why are they not discussed at the NATO conference? 70% of Russia's revenue is currently coming from India, EU, but we're told that China, that only accounts for 25% of it, is the enemy. Only one of these countries is being held accountable and blocked by NATO. Everybody just needs to wake up. NATO expansion is the same force of the forever war, and it is being enabled. What is happening to Ukrainian people is being enabled by the West, and we're told that it's not. And what do they call China at the NATO conference? The aggressor. India is called a peaceful partner, a free and democratic society. China's not democratic. And they're supporting the democratic world. You know, India is buying all of that Russia from that oil, that Russian oil, and it is buying it at a completely discounted rate, and it is selling it to Europe at the higher prices. They have every right to do that. That's in their national interest to do that. But why doesn't NATO call that out and they just call out China? Why does India get a pass? And we're told that we have to blame China. Because clearly, China is the next NATO target. See where this is going. NATO expansion in order to defend Ukraine. NATO expansion in order to defend Israel. NATO expansion in order to defend Taiwan. There was even a report that came out that saying that the drones that were used in Ukraine are glitching, and that they had to actually end up using China's drones instead. And so Ukraine is using Chinese drones as well, according to this report, but they don't report that. We're not allowed to understand that, because there is clearly one side that we need to understand. NATO is expanding to Asia. It's got 4 new military bases in Philippines, and NATO wants to increase that across all these different continents. And you're going to pay for it through higher inflation. The central bank's going to enable it, and the proof of weapons network is going to be the one that benefits from it. Now, there was a really other interesting development, and we're coming towards the end now. I know I keep saying it. But what did Ukraine do this week? It actually came to China in order to ask them to negotiate peace. So Saudi Arabia and Iran is being normalized by China. Ukraine's coming to China in order to negotiate peace with Russia. And US doesn't want peace. And UK Boris Johnson goes over and says, no, continue the war. Expand NATO budget, all the different countries. The Hungary Prime Minister, we talked about him, Orban. Sorry if I'm saying it wrong. He came out and he went over to visit Trump, and he said, I believe President Donald Trump did not survive the assassinations attempt by chance. He survived for one reason, and that is to bring peace to the world once again. And yet Trump then follows up, which I believe, we're told that Trump's the peace politician. And then he brings in J.D. Vance and says, if I die, you need to bomb Iran, because Netanyahu said so. Ukraine tells China that it's ready to negotiate peace. And President Xi Jinping, he also decides that he's going to host a conference with all the Middle Eastern leaders. The peace conference, remember, the difference with China is they have a Belt and Road Initiative, and they just want the status quo, but they will reunify with Taiwan if they consider it a risk, because Taiwan controls all the chips, that controls everything that matters in the world. So they want to resolve peace. They understand how to get peace, but America wants to push NATO expansion. So they hosted a conference in order to get peace between Israel and Palestine. And what it decided to do, it doesn't want to implement regime change. Yes, it's doing the Belt and Road Initiative. Yes, it's following, PBOC is following the Fed strategy. But it's saying, you carry on with your regime, we'll just try and do business with you, and your struggle is your struggle. And that's the difference with the IMF. So, what did China do? Well, it hosted Fatah, which is the competing force to, I don't want to say it because of the algorithms, but Hamas, and all the different Palestinian factions, and it got them to actually sign an agreement to create a unified negotiation for what they think will work as a two-state solution. It then also tried to host peace talks with Israel and encourage them to negotiate rather than do what they're doing. And they said, no, absolutely not. As I said, Netanyahu shared his plan. He revealed it all. And what retaliation did we get after that? More and more escalation from the other side. So now Russia said they're going to arm Yemen and the Houthis, and they're going to send them advanced anti-ship missiles. And that's going to be in retaliation for the United States arming Ukraine. Indonesia then came out and said that it's going to purchase more oil from Russia, that it doesn't care about the sanctions anymore, despite the Western sanctions. And the UAE came out and they're playing both sides. Saudi Arabia is playing both sides on BRICS and Abraham Alliance. And they're just going to decide which one wins. They don't really care. UAE is playing both sides. They said that they're willing to sell forces to multilateral, multinational stabilization and a mission for Gaza after the Israeli, I call it genocide, they call it war. And they're the first nation to say that they could deploy boots on the ground in order to try and get peace and push this forward. And we had further escalation. So Yemen's armed forces, they ended up, as we covered last week, they got through the Iron Dome. And remember, Israel said that they used US money in order to develop the Iron Dome, but they won't allow America to do it. You got to buy it back off them. Because Trump said that they want an Iron Dome. But these drones now and these chips that come from Taiwan, let's face it, in these drones, they managed to figure out how to trick the Iron Dome and get through. And there was the escalation in Tel Aviv. And everybody in Tel Aviv is fighting and protesting against their government. The people that I know say 75% are against Netanyahu and 25% are extreme on believing they need to just completely ethnically cleanse. And yet America's 100%, Congress, left, right, 100% behind it, with the exception of the people that haven't taken the money. And immediately we had more and more deaths. And we even had the port in Yemen, which, by the way, is the same strategy that they're using in Gaza. They create famine, they take away all of the aid, and now they blow up the report, which is responsible for 70% of all the aid being able to get through. And we end up with Iran basically having to build railway networks that has now connected the railway networks between Russia and China. And we have all these different corridors being built. Remember, we know that Syria is the way that all of these different Russian exports are able to get exported. And so Putin goes to meet the leader of Syria and does some public posturing as well, that they're looking to figure out how to resolve the ongoing crisis in the Middle East. Listen, people, recognize that you are being fed one side of the propaganda. There are governments all around the world that are creating atrocities. Bitcoin is an amazing part of the story. Bitcoin is a resistance movement against central banking. Understand that it's vital for every individual, every company, every country. It is a macro story. It is a geopolitical story. And as soon as we accept that there is a multipolar world and we stop listening to NATO that wants to allow all of this central banking warfare and the proof of weapons network to fund all of these expansions from NATO to Israel to Philippines in order to fight these proxy wars and kill more and more people. We need to defund the central banks. How do you defund the central banks? The system is lost. Opt out. Buy Bitcoin. That's how you sell central banks. Choose Bitcoin over the International Monetary Fund, like El Salvador is doing. And governments, pick your own reserve funds and put Bitcoin in it, because you're going to need it when they want to shove the central bank digital currency down your throat and bribe you in order to remove more freedoms through the occupation of all of the different companies, as Snowden, I am sure right now, is telling us is happening in the world. It is a dark, dark world, but there is one part of the world where everything is bright and rosy. And that is that Bitcoin is the force against all of this stuff. I believe it was a gift, a divine intervention given to us by God in order to use this, in order to try and make the world a better place. Now, you may see that as hyperbole. but we'll see where this runs out. And even if it doesn't go the way that I think I did, at least I will continue to remain committed to what I believe to be the truth and try and connect the dots so that you can decide what is your version of the truth. Let me know in the comments section below this video or tweet me and let me know where you think I'm wrong and where you think I'm right and what you're going to do about it. Always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Many are going to get wrecked in proof of weapons. I want more of you to do really well through proof of work. And I want us to do this with peace, love, and unity, not divide and conquer. And I want to see you on the right side of these trends. As always, this is episode 40 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. I will see you next week, where I will cover everything that I'm seeing happening this week in Bitcoin, macro, and geopolitics. And it is not calming down, so I'm sure I will be here for you next week. Join me at simondixon.com, create a free membership to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, and I'll make sure you're up to date with everything that's happening and keep you on the right side. Peace.